variation. So you can just go through these, and the nice thing is the variation moves, so it goes A, B, C, D, and then when you press fill again it just loops back to A, which is a really nice touch.
Greetings to all of you out there and welcome to our presentation. Today, first of all, before we go ahead, we want to give a hearty thank you to Lee Wilbraham over in the UK for doing a lot of videos recently on the Ketron products, specifically on the event series, Event 76, and also most recently on the EVM. And thanks to Lee, we're going to be able to dive into some of his videos, with his permission of course, and explain some of the features that he's using as he walks through this amazing keyboard. So in this first video, video number 1 of 33, there are 2 features that you just witnessed him using. One of them is voice to ABCD, which is otherwise known as one-touch setting in other manufacturers' lingo. And the other most important feature, which he ended the video with, is the functionality of the fill-in, the autofill. Now let's talk about that very briefly. So we're going to dive into our screen here so we can see how he works the autofill feature. So in that particular style he was playing, as you notice, that's the style he was using. Okay. Now, usually you can of course press the fill in button manually and go to the next variation. So that would require some steps, right? If you're playing the keyboard. So you notice I had to take my finger off the piano, press the fill, and then engage with the variation. What if you had an automated way to be able to do this? Well, you do have that. If you go into mode on your screen right there. Now, once you are in this mode screen, if you look at the center of the screen, you're going to see where it says fill in mode. And all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 icons refer to the different fill-in modes that you can have on this wonderful arranger. In other words, there are different ways you can program the fill buttons to react to the arrangement. Let's start over here with this one that's very, very interesting. All fills, and again, some of the terminology may not be easy to understand, but that's why you watch these videos, so we can break it down to you to make it more understandable, right? So here it says all fills end measure. What that means is all fills will be triggered at the end of a measure, right? So if you leave it the way it is right now, and you're playing a style, okay? When I press the fill in the middle of the measure, to wait until the end of the measure before the fill is heard. Let's try that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, trigger the fill, and there's no fill until the end of the measure. Now, how is this very useful? This is useful because there are times when you're playing a song, for an example, and sometimes you want to be able to trigger the fill, but you're doing something, you're busy with the way you're performing, something like this. In other words, you're busy doing something, maybe changing some chords and playing something when you want the fill to be triggered. So you don't have time to lift your finger off and press the button for the fill to come in. So you predetermine when you want that fill to come in, and you press the fill in the middle of a measure and then go back to playing, so that while you're doing your solo or something, the fill will now be played at the end of the measure. That's when you want to use that particular feature, all fills end of measure. If I touch that, I can say fill default, and fill default is your normal, whenever I press the fill, right there and then trigger the fill, something like this. In the middle of the measure, at the the end of the measure if I want. So regardless of at what point I press the fill in, you will hear the fill triggered in the style. That is what the fill default is, okay? But I can even get down a little bit more microscopic. I can go here and touch fill end measure, fill 1 end measure. So when I'm in Arranger A, or if I get out of here and I go to the fill and break screen, I can have fill number 1 be the only one that responds at the end of the measure. So if I'm playing fill 2 and 3, these will respond normally at any point in time I press the style. Right there, they responded. But if I do fill 1 in the middle of the style, fill 1 will wait until the end of the measure, 3, 4, and go. Okay? So I can determine that by going again into that same page and saying, hey, I want only this one, fill 1 or fill 2 or fill 3 or fill 4 or break 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I can determine which specific one I want to act or to respond to the fill when I go to the end of the measure. Okay? Get back into the main page and then go back into mode. So this is a very powerful icon indeed when it comes to programming the fill. The other one over here is this one. Now, usually within the arranger, I think most arrangers have this feature. When the arrangement is playing and you press and hold down the fill, it goes from fill 1 to fill 2 to fill 3 to fill 4, right? That's normal. No change in auto repeat means that when I engage this, if I press and hold down the fill, there should not be a switch over. In other words, I can do like this. Here we go with the fill, hold it down. So it's looping within the same fill, fill number 3. If I disengage this and I hold this down, it's going to go into fill 3. It's going to go to fill number 4. It's going to go to fill 1. It's going to go to fill 2. All right, so it's progressively going from fill to fill. But if I engage that and I hold down the fill, it just stays within that particular fill. It doesn't go from one fill to the other. The first one says fill break to arranger. So if you engage that, right, what that does is as you are playing, when you press the fill like this, it automatically jumps to the next variation. Okay, so that way you avoid yourself from pressing the fill and choosing what variation you want to go to. All you do is you press the fill one time and the arranger automatically jumps to the next fill. Okay, let's try again. If I'm in a variation C, as it is right now, the case, if I press the fill in button, you see that it jumps, okay, right there to the next variation. So that's the fill break to arranger. So fill break to arrange, if that is turned on, means that when you press the fill button, automatically the variation will switch once it finishes the fill and goes to the next variation. Okay, now if I go to the other one which says Aftertouch, now this is very interesting because this also is explained in one of the videos or expressed or used in one of the videos that Lee does very adequately. But let's explain what it means or what it's doing. So if I go to Aftertouch, let's turn that one on. That means that when I'm playing the keyboard, right, if I press the keyboard harder to engage the Aftertouch. Now usually Aftertouch is used for lead or for right hand voices. But in this case, you can also use the Aftertouch to trigger the fill, which again means that you don't have to take your finger off the keyboard to press a physical button. And how does that work? Let's dive in here. So if I go to this screen right here so you can see both what I'm doing, notice that if I play a chord on my left like this, if I now press hard on the key, see, the fill is engaged. All right, let's do that again. So that means that I don't have to take my finger physically off the keyboard and press any button. By pressing hard on the key, I can engage the Aftertouch. Now, sometimes some might complain that, but you know what? Sometimes I might use the Aftertouch when I'm playing lead voices. Well, as of OS 4.0, Ketron have a nice trick in there. If you touch Aftertouch again, it gives you the velocity. So you can also program how sensitive should it respond once you press hard on the key. So in some cases, for an example, when you're playing solo lines, you might play, let's say, at a velocity level of 108, 7, 6, 5, and 4 to trigger the Aftertouch functionality. But once you get to 110, then it will trigger the fill in. And of course, you can set this, for whatever value it is. For those of you that are heavy-handed, you'll want to put this at a higher number. So it's much more difficult to trigger the fill in as you perform. So now if you have that engaged with the Aftertouch and you have the fill to break arranger engaged together, now what happens when you're playing the variation and you press hard, the fill in will be turned on or engaged automatically and it will skip to the next variation, which means that my fingers are now free. I don't have to be pushing buttons back and forth. I just simply play like this. So notice what's happening there. Not only is the variation switching, but my fingers never left the keyboard, but the lead voice is also switching. Why? We're going to go to the second part that Lee was showing in that video as well, at the beginning of his video, which is the voice to ABCD. So in this particular case, now, for each of these variations, I have a different lead voice that is assigned to them. So in the case of variation A, I have a digital piano. In the case of variation B, I have, let's say, my double still. In variation C, I have my alt sax switch, and I'll talk about that. That's a Pro 4 voice coming up very shortly in the Pro 4 package. You want to get the Pro 4. A lot of automated stuff, articulation, nice EDM styles, nice Western styles, new lead voices, and all that stuff coming up in Pro 4. But we'll talk about Pro 4 later. And variation D, you also have the ensemble voice. So it doesn't have to be one-to-one. So for an example, I can set variation D to trigger this particular voice instead, and I can set variation B to trigger that voice. So when I'm playing along the variations, you see that once the variation comes on, the lead voice is now selected automatically. So let's try this together with the afterfill and take a listen as to how this is all going to work out. And there you have it. So in this very short video, we just explained two beautiful features that you can use with your Ketron event series. One is the voice to ABCD, otherwise known as your one touch, where depending on what variation you select, the lead voice is automatically selected for you. But most importantly is the automated fill-in, where you can tell the machine that, listen, when I press the keyboard a particular way, I want to trigger a fill. But not only that, I can set the velocity, how hard I press the key to trigger in a fill, and I can also set it where it's doing that and also doing the fill jump. In other words, going from variation A, B, C, and D. Stay tuned for video number 2 out of 33. Again, we have a whole series of videos coming out explaining all these little nuggets and all these little features that are buried under your Ketron event. Keep in touch.